Hello everybody and welcome. This is Niclas Huschenbeth, and in today's opening tutorial I want to show you the two knights defense. So what is the two knights defense? It arises after moves 1e4, e5, knight f3, attacks the pawn on e5, so black goes knight c6 to defend the pawn, while it brings out the bishop to c4, and now black has two main choices here. The Italian game, which arises after bishop c5, we'll look at that in another video, and the two knights defense bringing out the knight. It makes sense, black has developed both knights, so that's why it's called this way. And here white has pretty much three main choices, and it really depends on how sharp you want to play from early on. There's a very sharp move, knight to g5, a concrete approach to attack the pawn on f7. There's the move d4 to play in the center, and there's the move d3 to protect the pawn on e4. So let us begin with the sharpest move here. The move knight g5 attacks the pawn on f7 once more, and black cannot really easily parry this threat to the pawn. He needs to play d5 pretty much. There is also the Traxler variation bishop c5. Black sacrifice the pawn, sometimes even sacrifice a piece on f2, but this is what they did in the 19th century, and today it is known as not a great option for black. So let us see the move d5. White takes the pawn, attacks the knight on c6, and black has different choices here, but there's only one good one, which is the move knight to a5. If black takes back the pawn, white can already think about sacrificing a piece on f7 and following up with a check on f3. And he can also play a move like d4, developing more pieces, and this whole setup with the knight on d5 and the pieces of white already on the right squares is not a great idea for black, so this is not recommended. And instead black should go knight a5 here, attacking the bishop. White plays bishop b5 check. Black can go bishop d7, also possible, but the main move is c6, takes, and now white has many options. The bishop is attacked, so white typically brings it back to d3 or e2 or even to f1. There's also the move queen f3. But in either case, no matter what white does in this position, black has very nice compensation for the pawn here, because he has better development and he has more space. And the theory has shown that black is doing okay. He has enough compensation. Even with computers, you cannot dispute that. So this is an interesting option, but you have to be aware for black, if you play the two knights defense, that you end up in such a situation where you're pawn down and you have to prove the compensation. And for white, if you want to go for this, here you're defending from early on. Yes, you're pawn up, but black has some good attacking chances maybe later on, depending on what happens. So let us come back to the position after knight f6 and take a look at d4, which I consider to be also an interesting option for white. Now black typically takes on d4, white goes e5, attacking the knight on f6, and black can move the knight here to e4, to g4. Both those moves are possible, but the clear main move is to play d5, and that's also something I want you to remember, because it happens in a lot of different variations. Black ignores the threat to the knight and attacks the bishop on c4 himself. Now white typically moves the bishop to b5, black moves the knight, which was still attacked, and white wins back the pawn on d4. Here the knight is attacked, so black usually goes bishop d7, and I just want to give you an idea of the kind of structure we get here. White castles, bishop to c5, now white wins some time by attacking the knight and develops the bishop to e3, unpinning the knight on d4. And just to give you an idea what can happen here, let's stop at this position and take a look. Here white has a pawn majority on the king side. That means he can start an attack against the black king. For example, you can imagine if black plays some kind of move, then white can push f5, and he has the option to either go f6 or e6 and really get to the black king, open up the pawns in front of the black king. And this is why I personally quite like this variation, because if black isn't careful, it can give white some good attacking chance. On the other hand, also the pawn structure of black is slightly damaged here with the double pawns on the c file. Still, the position is okay for black, and he has different ways to equalize for sure, but he needs to know his way around, and I think it's a good way to surprise your opponent against the two knights defense, because most players don't look into it that much. Let's come back to this position and take a look at the main move. First, maybe I should point out that there are other moves here like knight c3, but they don't promise white anything, because here another motive I wanted to take away from this video: black can take on e4, and after white takes, black plays d5, and with this fork he wins back the piece he has just sacrificed, and turns out from then his position is completely fine. So this is why knight c3 is not a great try, and castle is possible, but here again black can just take the pawn, and there are some gambits here, some options for white, but they don't promise white much. Black needs to know maybe some moves, but it's really not that difficult, and then he'll have a completely fine position. So I also don't recommend to play like this. d3 is the main move, simply protecting the pawn on e4, and if black goes bishop c5 now, we transpose to the Italian game, so we'll not look at this today. Instead, black usually goes bishop to e7 and develops the bishop to this square. Now white castles, black castles, and we have reached our main goals so far. We have developed our pieces, we have brought our king to safety, and we're fighting for the center. So those are the golden opening rules, as I've told you already in previous videos, but it's always good to repeat and to remember, and this has been quite in harmony with these goals, the first opening moves. Now white has different ways to play. He can develop his knight, he can go for something like c3, but the main move is to play a4 here, gaining space on the queen side and also giving the bishop a way to retreat if necessary. And now let's just have a look at something like this, where again black has many choice, and I want to talk about the general plans for both sides here. So black has two ways to play. He can either prepare d5, the break in the center. This is very typical also for the Italian game, but he needs to make sure the pawn on e5 is sufficiently protected, or he can prepare f5 at some point. That means he needs to move his king to get out of the pin, he needs to move his knight, and then he can push f5. So you can see that takes some time, but it is a possibility, and white needs to take this serious, because if the f file opens up, there are maybe some attacking chances for black. The main difference, by the way, between this position and the Italian position, as you might have noticed already, is the bishop placement. The bishop is on e7 and is in more of a defender role versus the bishop on c5 in the Italian game. That means, for example, that bishop g5 is not really useful here because it's not pinning the knight on f6. So this is what black is doing, going for a break d5 or f5, whereas white typically wants to prepare the break d4 in the center. And he can do this in a number of ways. Typical is to bring the rook to e1, knight to g3, or possibly to e3. And then, if necessary, also white can support the break with c3. So those are the plans, and just to summarize, again, it depends on what you want to do here. You can play very sharp with knight g5, you can play a little bit less sharp but still very interestingly with d4, or you can play simply d3 and develop your pieces. Nothing much can go wrong here in the first moves, so this is definitely an approach I recommend for beginner players. Simply develop your pieces and then play in the center. So this is your overview of the two knights defense. Let me know if you have any questions, and if you enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to my channel. Leave a like for this video, I'll be happy to see that, and then I'll catch you guys again very soon. Goodbye.